Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Iceberg Live, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Iceberg. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe, all of that fun stuff. Or you can find us wherever you get your podcast from. It's been a slow start for the Pittsburgh Penguins to the preseason. They dropped last night's home opener in the preseason by a final score of 3-2. We'll jump into both of those matchups against the Buffalo Sabres and what we need to do when it comes to preseason, which is look at individual performance and not team performance, because for the most part, a lot of those players that were on the ice last night aren't going to be on the ice on October 9th. So you look at these individual performances, especially when it comes to guys like Harrison Brunick, guys like Tanner Howe who played, because these are guys that have not played together with a lot of the people that are on the ice. So it's going to be a little bit disjointed. So we'll give our takeaways from the first two preseason matchups, look ahead at what the Penguins have on the docket for the next week. And then, as we do every single Wednesday, we'll give you our 3 stars of this past week, and especially because it's preseason, there might be a little bit of off-ice flair to that as well. And then we'll close things out as we do every single time we come on these live streams, and we'll answer all of your questions. So if you're tuned in live to Tip of the Iceberg on YouTube, make sure you drop your questions in the comment and let me know, what was your biggest takeaway from the Penguins' first 2 preseason matchups against the Buffalo Sabres? Let's start things off by looking at those games and looking at Saturday's game in particular. A 7-3 loss for the Penguins up in Buffalo. 5 goals allowed in the first 6 minutes of the second period, and that was the story in this one. A rough night for Joel Blomqvist. Coming off of a great rookie season in the American Hockey League, everybody was expecting Blomqvist to come in and just kind of pick up where he left off, and sometimes that's just not the case. Now, of course, you have to look at the fact that the Sabres were playing pretty much their NHL lineup as they try to get ready to go and open up the season a week before everybody else in the Global Series against the Penguins, who had mostly, my co-host yesterday, Nick Horwat, said it was a WHL lineup, to be exact, for what he said. Again, you hope to see some individual performances. You would have hoped to see a little bit better from Joel Blomqvist, but they just jumped on him in that second period, and it just seemed like he wasn't tracking his shots well. I mean, some of those goals were deflected, but on a couple of those goals, it was a clear lane, and he just got beat. So a rough night there for Blomqvist. We'll get to him in a second when we talk about last night's game. The only other big takeaway that I have from Saturday is obviously the hat trick from Jesse Puljujarvi. What I liked about the hat trick from Puljujarvi is, one, he needs to be better at finishing to earn his spot on the NHL roster in general. But 2, look at the way that those 3 goals went in. First goal's a redirection on the power play, standing in front of the net, tips in the Ville Koivunen shot pass. It looked like Koivunen meant to set him up in that way. You look at the second goal. He's streaking down the side. Rutger McGroarty led him, gave him some time and some space to skate into where the puck was. He gets around the defender, dekes the goaltender out, and tucks the puck behind the goaltender's pad for the second goal. And the third goal, he gets an opportunity at the top of the circles in the middle of the zone. He just grips it and rips it, and he just flat out beats the netminder. So 3 goals in 3 pretty different ways for Jesse Puljujarvi, a player in which he's always had a good forecheck. He's always been able to use his size. He has a pretty good skating stride for a big guy, especially a big guy that has had double hip resurfacing surgery. It was all about finishing. He was able to do that in his first preseason matchup, and he was one of the biggest takeaways from both of these games for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Let's jump over and let's talk about last night's loss to the Buffalo Sabres. A little bit closer in this one, a 3-2 loss, all 3 goals given up by Alex Nedeljkovic. But because I was so hard on Joel Blomqvist talking about the first game, I do want to give him some props for this one. Comes in at the midway point and shuts the door on the Buffalo Sabres in the second half of the game. 11 saves on 11 shots. A nice bounce back for Bloma as he continues to try to figure out his spot in the Penguins organization. If you look at where the goaltending stands right now, you have Tristan Jarry, who is yet to make his preseason debut. I would imagine that comes this weekend in one of the back-to-back games we'll talk about in a few minutes. You have Alex Nedeljkovic, who gave up 3 goals here, was knocking off some of the rust, his first game action that he's seen since April. And then you have Joe Blomqvist. I mean, yes, you brought over Philip Larson, and maybe he could take over the number 3 role, but it seems as if the Penguins are putting a lot of weight on Joel Blomqvist's shoulders in the case of an emergency, in the case of an injury. They're going to turn to this kid if he continues to play the way that he played at the tail end of last season. Yes, everybody is enamored with Sergei Murashov, but he's not going to be put into that high leverage of a situation this early in his career. He's going to come over and essentially be what Blomqvist was last year, which is the number 4, number 5 guy who's going to get a lot of AHL experience. And by the end of the year, might earn himself an opportunity, but he has to jump or things have to go in a certain way for him to get that opportunity. Whereas Blomqvist, there's a real shot that he opens the season as the number 3 goaltender for the Penguins, the starter for the AHL Penguins, and a guy that could get his NHL debut this season. So the Penguins view him very highly after a good rookie season. He bounces back in game 2, and it was a nice performance to see, I should say, from number 30 between the pipes. One thing I will say about last night's game, it was first look at Sebastian Aho, where I really honed in on Sebastian Aho, and it was not good. Right? He finishes the night with a -2. He just looked like he was all over the place. It was the pairing of him, and I believe he was playing with John Ludwig. I don't have it in my notes, and I'm brain farting on who I saw him with, but I believe it was him and Ludwig through the... Oh, no, it was him and Shea. That's why. I get those two mixed up all the time. It was him and Ryan Shea. That pairing did not look good last night. Specifically, Aho did not look good last night. You're hoping he steps up because Aho is a guy that you were hoping was going to come in here and push Jack St. Ivan, who was going to come in here and push Ryan Shea and push John Ludwig to get the opportunities to have playing time on that third pairing. Rough opening night. And again, it is one night. There are, I believe, 5 preseason games left, so we'll have plenty of time to see more from Sebastian Aho, but not a good first impression for him in the city of Pittsburgh. Transversely, on the other side of things, I want to give a shout out to Cody Glass. Made a few nice plays in the offensive zone. The puck seeming to find his stick a little bit more last night. He had the shot on goal to set up the Kevin Hayes goal that tied things up in the second period. He also then hit the post off the rush later in the period, had another chance with about a minute left in the period. So it seems like he's starting to get around the puck a little bit more. The curse of the 19 hopefully stays away from him. We know what happened with Derek Brassard with that number. We know what happened with Riley Smith with that number. So we're hoping Cody Glass comes in and avoids that downturn in play and actually reverses its fortunes. He looked good last night. I want to see him build off of that, especially because, and we'll get into this more tomorrow on a full episode of the Tip of the Iceberg, but the Penguins, for their second practice today, rolled out a pseudo NHL team. Cody Glass was on it. So it's likely that Cody Glass is in that lineup on October 9th. You'd like to see him continuing to build off of what he did last night. I thought he was pretty impressive. And of course, we'll talk about him, but Jack St. Ivan is the story from last night. He looks to have picked up where he left off last year, and it looks like the business of hockey might not even be able to get in the way of him being in the lineup on October 9th. He is playing very well in this training camp, and he played very well in his preseason debut last night. Up next for the Pittsburgh Penguins, because those are the first 2 games, and you lose them, and let's be honest, and if you're a wholehearted Pittsburgh sports fan, which means you like the Steelers and you like the Pirates. We'll leave the Pirates out of it for right now, but the Steelers went 0-3 in the preseason. They're 3-0 in the regular season, so the record doesn't matter. We look at these individual performances, guys like Puljujarvi, guys like Glass, guys like St. Ivan. Last night, it was a guy like Blomqvist who looked to steady things between the pipes. So don't worry about the record. They're 0-2, but at the end of the day, they're 0-0, and that doesn't change until October 9th. Coming up next in the next week, they have 3 preseason games, including a rare back-to-back in the preseason. It's a little strange. They got rid of the doubleheader with the Columbus Blue Jackets that they've done a couple of times over the past couple of seasons. Instead, they got back-to-back games this weekend, and I'm sure they're going to be splitting their squad a little bit to make sure that nobody, or at the very least, a very few amount of players end up having to play in both games. But Saturday, they take on the Detroit Red Wings at Little Caesars Arena. Then Sunday, taking on the Ottawa Senators in the Kraft Hockeyville game. So that's going to be a fun one to watch. And then next Tuesday, they take on Detroit back at PPG Paints Arena. That's what's on the docket for the Penguins in the next week. Will we start to see some of these star players get some action? You would think so, right? You would think that this weekend you get your first look at Sidney Crosby. You would think that this weekend you get your first look at Evgeny Malkin and Brian Rust and Chris Letang and even Marcus Pettersson. All of these guys sat out those first 2 games against Buffalo, and I get it. 7 preseason games feels like a lot, and it feels like more importantly, the time for the Penguins to figure out what they have in a lot of these other young players. These players like Owen Pickering, who made his Penguins preseason debut last night. Players like a Sebastian Aho, who's new to the organization. What does he look like with Ryan Shea, which could potentially be a pairing at some point this season? So I understand it. You don't want to put your star players out there a lot. They don't really need to be out there a lot. But I am excited to see them get onto the ice and see them knock the rust off a little bit, because we know that it happens to everybody, no matter if you're Sidney Crosby or if you're the 65th person on the Penguins roster. But that's it for the recap of this week, the preview of next week. Let's get into the 3 stars of the week. And I want to start it off with my 3rd star. 2 players that I just mentioned, 2 players that have yet to play a single second of preseason hockey, and yet they got the 3rd star of the week. Now, why is that? Well, it's because we love a little bit of Berg on Berg love. Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang, and shout out to Drew O'Connor as well, all at the Steelers home opener earlier this week on Sunday. Steelers get the 20-10 victory, but it was all kicked off with the terrible towel twirl, which a little bit of off-branding. I don't like terrible towel twirl, whatever. Either way, they kick things off with the terrible towel twirl at the Steelers home opener. We actually have the video here via the Pittsburgh Penguins on social media. Just a quick heads up, because, I mean, Gino and Letang did their job. The video is a little bit loud, so make sure you adjust your ears. Here's the video of Chris Letang and Evgeny Malkin pumping up the Pittsburgh Steelers fan base before their home opener this weekend.
Pittsburgh Penguins star Chris Letang and Evgeny Malkin. Steeler Nation, bring those terrible towels.
Another quick shout out to Drew O'Connor there. Looked like a proud dad. Yeah, go Tanger. I don't know why he didn't do it. I mean, maybe they just wanted the star players, but I would have liked to see Drew O'Connor come out of the tunnel with the smoke billowing behind him. But I digress on that point. Those 3 bring home a win for the Pittsburgh Steelers. They got the crowd going, and it was a lot of fun to see them, and really everything that they did on Sunday, all the social snippets that they were able to do, getting everybody going. And, we're excited for Penguins hockey to return. We're excited the Pittsburgh Steelers are 3-0. Again, Pirates, we'll leave that to the back. Paul Skeens is good. I always rest my hat on that this season. But shout out to Malkin and Letang, 3rd star of the week for their terrible towel twirl. Let's go to the 2nd star of the week as we pull up the graphic for those watching on Tip of the Ice-Burgh YouTube channel. 2nd star of the week, I'm going with Jack St. Ivany. 1 game played and 1 goal, but he's a defenseman. So at the end of the day, offense isn't expected. Always a plus, and always nice when you have a defensive defenseman like St. Ivany taking the puck in the neutral zone, leading the rush a little bit before dishing the puck off to a oncoming forward, and then making the play when he goes to the front of the net, where goals happen. Garbage goal, but hey, you love to see him do that. And then also defensively, he just looked like he did in the last 13 games of last season. Obviously, coming into the year, everybody wants to see Jack St. Ivany start on the NHL roster, start on that 3rd pairing with Ryan Graves, because, well, St. Ivany impressed a lot of people last year. It looks like he has come in and he has maybe not solidified that spot, but he has come in and he has taken charge of his own opportunity. It looks like it's going to be hard to deny him. Again, the business of hockey. Jack St. Ivany is waivers exempt. If they don't want to put a John Ludwig, if they don't want to put a Ryan Shea, Sebastian Aho on waivers, which Aho is not going to go on waivers, it would more likely be one of Shea or St. Ivany. He's forcing their hand to keep him up and to try to put one of them on waivers because he's playing that good. Again, we still have 2 weeks till the home opener. We have 2 weeks till the opening of the season. There's time for somebody else to step up and make this a little bit closer. But at the same time, I like what I've seen from Jack St. Ivany to this point of the preseason. And I think that he is the 2nd star of the week. And the 1st star, of course, let's go with Jesse Puljujärvi. I mean, the guy scored a hat trick. How do you go against a guy that played in 1 game and he scored a hat trick? I mentioned earlier that I love to see all 3 of the goals that he scored because they were 3 goals in 3 entirely different ways. This is a player that, if he can finish, is going to be on the NHL roster and is going to be a big part of the NHL roster and the resurgence of the Penguins' bottom 6. Now, he had a hat trick. It certainly makes a statement because he came into the camp on the roster bubble. Is that enough to put him in pole position? I would say no. I would say not yet, but it is certainly going to make a statement. It is certainly going to force the Penguins to look a little bit more in Puljujarvi's direction over the next couple of weeks. He didn't play last night. We'll see what other games he gets into with the 5 remaining of the NHL preseason. So that's what you have for the 3 stars of this week. Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang is your 3rd star for the terrible towel twirl. Jack St. Ivany is your 2nd star of the week for his goal and just overall performance against the Buffalo Sabres. And Jesse Puljujarvi for opening up the preseason with a Hattie. We're going to take a quick break. When we return, answering all of your questions. So make sure if you're tuned in live at Tip of the Ice-Burgh on YouTube that you drop them in the comment section. We'll get to them, like I mentioned, right after this break. Welcome back to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh Live. I'm still getting the gist of these ad breaks on YouTube, as some of you who watched probably saw my face pop up as I was reading your questions, which, if you have more of them, toss them in the chat. We're going to get to those starting right now. Let's go to Jay and lead things off with that. Mike Sullivan spoke very highly of Avery Hayes. Do you think he pushes for a bottom 6 spot next season? Avery Hayes is a guy who last training camp had a great, and I mean great, prospects challenge. He kind of faded into the back as training camp started, so that was the biggest question coming into this training camp after he had, once again, another very solid prospects challenge. He was the 2nd star of the week last week on Tip of the Ice-Burgh Live. Could he continue it? Well, through 2 preseason games and through the first week of training camp, he still looks to be fairly impressive. This is a guy that is going to get opportunities at the American Hockey League level this season, probably play the entire season at the American Hockey League level. And if things bounce right, which you can say the same for a guy like Tristan Brose, you can say the same for, guys like Una Koppinen, guys like Mark Johnstone. If the injuries occur at the right time and you fit into that mold and you're playing well, that's who the Penguins are going to bring up. They don't always have a hierarchy. A lot of the times, Mike Sullivan just simply says, listen, he's been the hot hand down in Wilkes-Barre. We needed a guy to come up, and we called him up to see if he could continue that at the NHL level. You could see Hayes at some point this season make that cup of coffee game or two if he's playing well in Wilkes-Barre, and then there's an injury that just so happens to coincide with that timing-wise. As far as making it as an actual everyday member of the bottom 6, you're probably waiting at the very least for another season. And again, this is a guy that is going to have to jump a lot of names. You have Ville Koivunen. You have Vasily Ponomarev ahead of him. You have, as of right now, Sam Poulin, Valtteri Puustinen, Jesse Puljujarvi. It's very crowded in the Penguins' bottom 6 right now because we haven't really figured out all of the answers to even the new names that have come in. Blake Lizotte, Cody Glasses, who somebody has a question about that we'll get to in a minute. So Avery Hayes would have to have a very good season and then put together another very good training camp to get himself in position to potentially be that everyday player next year. But I think he's continuing to build, and what you're seeing from him is a guy that is going to be a good piece for your AHL squad and somebody who might be able to be called upon as an injury replacement at some point, probably later in the season. I don't think he would be an early season call-up. I think that they would defer to some of their higher name prospects. Let's go over to Evan, who wants to know, oh Lord, We're already starting with these questions. How do you think Ryan Graves did in his first two games of the preseason? Well, it doesn't look much improved from last season, but again, it is preseason hockey. He's getting his legs underneath him. But I do think that there is still some worries and some current concerns that I have about Ryan Graves' game. They were hoping that this offseason would be an opportunity for him to reset, come out, and have a better year number two, more akin to what you saw in year two with New Jersey, more akin to what you saw in year two with the Colorado Avalanche. So they were hoping that that would be the case. And that still could be the case. It's only been 2 preseason games, but something about him, he just doesn't look comfortable. And I don't know what that is. I don't know. It can't be partner because he's looked that way with everybody that he's played with since he came to Pittsburgh. So maybe he just needs to get his feet underneath him. Maybe he needs to knock the rust off as well. But I will say I was not impressed with Ryan Graves through the first 2 preseason games. Gunnar Murphy wants to know, where does Cody Glass best slot into the Penguins lineup? That's been a tough question that I've been asking myself all preseason long. Yesterday, he looked really good next to Kevin Hayes and Rutger McGroarty. So maybe he best slots in as that third pairing or third line right winger. Maybe he's the one that wins that job over a Puljujarvi, over a Puustinen, over even maybe a McGroarty if they want him to start in the American Hockey League, which we'll talk about in a minute with one of these other questions here. But I think Cody Glass, as much as, you know, we had State of Hoppy on, I believe it was last week or the week before that, said that he wants to see Cody Glass get an opportunity in the top 6 because he had that pedigree. He had that talent coming out in the NHL draft, and he just never was able to latch on in Vegas, latch on in Nashville. Maybe they give him that opportunity here, but the Penguins' top 6 is fairly set. So I think where he best slots in right now is that third line right wing. And if he can find his game, if he can look like he did last night against full NHL lineups in games that matter, I think the Penguins have a nice piece that could hopefully turn into something that helps them for a couple of years. But as of right now, I think he slots in as that third line right wing. Things could change. There's still 2 weeks before the season, but I think that's where he best fits as of this moment. Mitch wants to know, do you think we'll see Sid and Gino in any preseason games this year? Yeah, we do every year. It might not be very many. It might be 2 or 3 of the 7 total. They haven't played yet. But I do think you see Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin. They always play in preseason games. They always try to knock the rust off because, well, why wouldn't you, right? Why would you want to go into opening night, especially for the Penguins, when it's on national television against one of your biggest rivals, the New York Rangers, a team that is going to be very good this year? Why would you want to go into that as your first real action of the year? So they will play. I wouldn't be surprised if Sid played in Kraft Hockeyville. Gino obviously plays in Kraft Hockeyville a lot too. So you're definitely going to see them at some point during this preseason. Brandon Rickner says, is Rutger McGroarty flying under the radar a bit? Not the greatest first period last night, but his last 40 was impressive. Is he still due a shot with top 6 caliber centers? I mean, at some point, yes, but I think what you're seeing is they're not putting him up there until he earns it. I think that is one of the things that you can glean upon the first week of the preseason. Now that, you know, the whole team is out there since last Wednesday, you can kind of tell they like McGroarty. They're excited for McGroarty. They're going to give him opportunities, but he's going to have to earn his opportunities to play with Crosby, to play with Malkin, and to play in the NHL. Because that is a question as of right now. And we'll get to Jay in a second who asks that. But I do think that he's played well every time I've seen him. He hasn't gone out there and stolen the show. But I mentioned that second goal for Jesse Puljujarvi. That is a really good breakout pass from Rutger McGroarty off of the boards and allowed Puljujarvi to lead into the puck, to skate into the puck. It didn't slow him down. It didn't stop his momentum. He allowed him to keep going, which is why Puljujarvi was able to beat Owen Power to the front of the net and able to get that second goal. So it's little plays like that I've really liked out of Rutger McGroarty. He had a really good opportunity last night, but Michael Hauser, I believe, was still in the net at the time. Stonewalled him. I mean, amazing 10-bell save by Hauser. But McGroarty, I think, has shown to be exactly who you wanted him to be. Now, is that a player that's going to make the NHL roster? That's what Jay wants to know. Let's jump down to that question right now. Jay said, it's looking like Rutger starting at the AHL is becoming a bigger possibility. Do you think he should be on the NHL roster in game 1? or play big minutes in the AHL for a couple of games before making the jump. The good thing about the NHL, there's 82 of these things. You have 82 games. And I know, as somebody who's watched the Penguins the last 2 years, should be fully aware that every game matters. And the slower you start, the harder it is to dig yourself out of a hole, because that's been the story. The Penguins have fallen 1 point shy of the playoffs in the last 2 seasons. And you could look as early last year as that Anaheim game in the second week of the year, where they had a 5-on-3 in a tie game and they with 2 minutes left, and they end up losing in regulation. You get that one extra point, who knows what happens at the end of the year. I understand that. I don't think Rutger McGroarty at this stage of his career makes or breaks the Penguins in the first 2 weeks of the season. And I think that there's some other players on this team that you need to see a little bit more of. You need to figure a little bit more out. Like a guy like Anthony Beauvillier. He deserves NHL minutes early in the season to see what he can do. A guy like Jesse Puljujärvi might be earning that opportunity. And with Rutger McGroarty being waivers exempt, it is, as you mentioned, Jay, looking like a bigger and bigger possibility that he starts in the American Hockey League. I don't think he stays there very long. I don't think he stays there for more than a month if he does. But I do think that it's becoming more and more of a possibility that the numbers game ends up being what pushes McGroarty out. But by the end of the year, he is undoubtedly going to be one of the, I don't want to say key parts, but he is undoubtedly going to be an everyday NHLer for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Nick wants to know, after a couple of games under their belts, what is your current lineup for the bottom 6? Well, according to Matt Venzel, the Penguins put an NHL-centric group out there, and this was their bottom 6. So I want to give you theirs before I give you what I would like to see. They have Beauvillier, Eller, Puljujärvi, Hayes, Lizotte, Acciari, and then Glass and Ponomarev rotating in. And that was just today. Mike Sullivan said right after practice, yeah, we went with lines that we kind of knew about, and those can change tomorrow, because Mike Sullivan loves to remind us of that every single time he takes the podium during training camp. I still would like to see Lars Eller as the 4C, because I feel like Kevin Hayes could take that 3C duty. So with that in mind, I would put Lizotte over on the left wing with Eller and Acciari. I still think that that's a line that could do wonders for the Pittsburgh Penguins. And then I would put Beauvillier, Hayes, and Cody Glass as the third line as of right now. And again, that's based on what I've seen through a couple of games, based on reports I've read from a couple of practices. And of course, you know, you can throw in the prospects challenge for a guy like Ponomarev and a guy like Rutger McGroarty. But as of right now, to kind of go off of what they have been running over in practice today, I would go Beauvillier, Hayes, Glass, Lizotte, Eller, Acciari, with Puljujärvi as the 13th forward. Let's check and see if there were any other questions in here, as we ran out of the ones that I checked whenever we were in our break. Evan wants to know, what were your thoughts on Kevin Hayes last night? Because I was pleasantly surprised. I mean, Kevin Hayes, you kind of know what you're going to get with him, right? The guy has been, for the most part in his career, the same player the entire time. He's a big body. He's not the most fleet of foot, but he can make plays in the offensive zone. And realistically, he's somebody that you can count on to go out there and eat up minutes and potentially score 45 to 50 points like he did 2 seasons ago with the Philadelphia Flyers. Last night, first action, seeing Kevin Hayes in a Penguins jersey, I thought he was fine. He was a guy that clearly I'm honestly okay with seeing him start as the third line center. So if that doesn't tell you what I think about him, I just think that he's a reliable guy. He's a guy that you can put in the middle of the ice, and he's a guy that the Penguins can really use anywhere around their bottom 6. I like the addition, especially whenever you consider the fact of what you got and what you gave up, which was absolutely nothing to get some draft capital. I think he's going to be a fun player for the Penguins this year, for certain. Let's look at some other ones. Justin Long wants to know, do you think Rutger starts at left wing 1? Yes, for the American Hockey League. I think that is, as of right now, where I feel like he's going to end up starting the season. And again, somebody else down here said, Hemi Head said there's only so many spots. They can't all have a spot. It's a numbers game. That's where I think it stands with Rutger McGroarty. This is a player that they're in no rush to get him to the NHL, because they know that if they do this right, they're going to have a player for the next handful of years. I mean, short-term and long-term. That's why they made the trade. So I don't think they're going to rush Wrecker McGroarty. I think the fact that he's waivers exempt and they have just so many other names that they probably want to see get a couple of NHL games under their belt. I think he starts at left wing, first line, American Hockey League to start the season. As I said earlier in the episode, do I think he spends a lot of time in the American Hockey League? No, I don't. I think it might be a couple of weeks till the Penguins figure out a little bit more with some of these guys at the NHL level, but I do foresee, as of right now, Rucker on the outside looking in at the NHL spots going into October 9th. Justin has another one here asking, so is Drew O'Connor left wing one on October 9th? Who knows? They started with Beauvillier for 1 week with Crosby. They moved DOC, Drew O'Connor up there today in practice. So I would say that, tie goes to the person that's done it before. I would say Crosby probably vouches a lot for Drew O'Connor. I mean, they're stallmates. Last year, they really picked up a groove, and that was with Rust on the right side as well. So if it isn't broke, don't fix it, right? It worked at the end of last season. There's no reason to not give it an opportunity and give it a shot to start out this season. Jackson, my apologies, Jackson, says, why doesn't Pittsburgh put Bunting on the top line with Sid and Rusty? I'm sure you'll see that at some point this season, but I've mentioned multiple times throughout the summer, I don't care who the Penguins get. I want to see more of Michael Bunting and Evgeny Malkin, because Michael Bunting, he unlocked something in Malkin, and you can say that it was Bunting. You can say that it was Malkin's parents coming over for the first time in 4 or 5 years. They kind of unlocked him a little bit towards the end of last season. But the last 11, 12 games, everybody likes to talk about Crosby going on a ridiculous run. Everybody likes to talk about Nedeljkovic being the guy night in and night out, and they deserve their due. Kenny Malkin was really good with Michael Bunting, and not to mention that, it also unlocked Rickard Rakell. So while I do think that you might see Bunting on that top line with Sid and Rusty, and I think that is a card that it is going to be dealt at some point this season, I want to see Michael Bunting start the year with Malkin. I want to see him build off of what they did last year and see if they can't get Evgeny Malkin going early this season and get him to be a little bit more consistent. Because if he was consistently what he was at the end of last year, nobody would falsely accuse Malkin of falling off. I've gone to bat for Evgeny Malkin's performance last year on multiple occasions. It wasn't the prettiest, but the production stands for itself. He was still one of the best second-line centers in hockey, and a large portion of that, and a large reason for that, I should say, is his success with Michael Bunting. So I do think eventually Mike Sullivan might do that, especially if they get off to a slow start, because Bunting is somebody that can galvanize anybody. But I do think him with Malkin is the best thing for the Penguins to start the season. Nick wants to know, do you expect to see Sergei Murashov in the next game after the slow start for Joel Blomqvist? I'm not sure how much playing time Murashov is going to get, but I think with the back-to-back this weekend, you're going to see Jari get in. You're going to see Nedeljkovic get another shot. It comes down to, I think Blomqvist will probably be in one of those games as well if they play the 50-50 game like they've done the first 2 games. Well, I don't know if that was the plan in game 1, but Blomqvist just got pulled. But it's going to either be Murashov or Larson. I think the Penguins want to see more from Sergei Murashov. I certainly want to see more from Sergei Murashov, but we'll get to see more of that at the AHL this season. Whether or not he plays in the next game, I'm not sure. But the fact that Blomqvist started on Saturday and then came in planned relief on Tuesday, I wouldn't be surprised if Murashov got an opportunity this weekend, whether that's the next game on Saturday or on Sunday. I'd like to see it. I think the Penguins right now probably have him at 5th on their depth chart, which means it's hard to kind of get into that rotation in the preseason. I think they have Philip Larson higher just because Larson's a guy that they might end up having to use at some point this season, whereas Murashov, they're going to protect him as much as they can and let him grow at his own pace. So with that in mind, it might be a little bit harder for him to crack the preseason rotation, but I do think we see him at some point. Let's go over to Flux CC, who says, interestingly, they had Ponomarev practicing with the NHL group for the second half of practice today doing penalty kill work. Is he a dark horse to make the roster? Something to watch, in my opinion. He was always a guy that I don't think people gave enough credit to, because when the trade was made last year, Bunting came over. Ponomarev obviously immediately went up to Wilkes-Barre to play in the AHL. Koivunen stayed over in Europe and finished off his professional season before coming over. Whenever Dubas was talking about these players, he was talking about Vasily Ponomarev making his Penguins debut at the NHL level last season. He got hurt. That kind of put a stop to that. He didn't come back before the season ended. He didn't get his opportunity, which stunk. But that's where they viewed him last year. Now coming into this year, he gets the opportunity of Prospects Challenge. I thought he looked good. He's gotten the opportunity over the last week. All reports are indicating that he's performing well. Hence the reason he was with the NHL group. So dark horse to make the roster. I'm not sure because, again, the numbers game here. Puljujarvi, does he get a shot? Puustinen, does he get a shot? Who was not with the NHL-centric group that you're referencing, Flux CC. Cody Glass is going to stay up because he's $2+ million. So whenever I look at Vasily Ponomarev, he's a name that if he doesn't make the roster out of camp, you have to put him among one of the first 2 or 3 injury call-ups or, falter call-ups. That's something else early in the season. We saw it from Jansen Harkins, but he was given opportunities all of last year. More specifically, we saw that with Radim Zohorna. Started good, did not make the roster then, was taken out of the roster, and they replaced him with somebody from the AHL. I think Ponomarev ends up in that 2 to 3 range where if there's an injury, if somebody falters, he might be one of the names that gets, brought up. Chicken a la King, great name, says, will anybody get placed on waivers tomorrow? Potentially, but at the same time, they have back-to-back preseason games this weekend. They're going to want to keep as many people on their preseason roster so they don't have to make people pull double duty this weekend as possible. So there's a shot always, of course, because the Penguins, they have to get down to 23 names in the next 2 weeks. They still are well over 40. So they're going to have to make some of those changes, some of those adjustments. They're going to have to make some. They're not technically roster cuts because most of the time they're sent back to the AHL or sent back to their junior team, like we saw with a handful of players over the weekend. But, there is always chances and there's always opportunities that somebody ends up getting placed on waivers. Let's go down and see Brandon Rickner's question as we have a couple more to answer before closing out today's show. Brandon Rickner wants to know, is anybody going to claim Poulin off of waivers? He doesn't look to be an NHL caliber player. Is he really a guy you want in your AHL top 6 this year, helping develop other players? I would like him in the AHL to start the season because, quite frankly, at this point, I don't put him on the NHL roster. That was what one of the goals was going to be for Sam Poulin. Can he come in and force his way onto the NHL roster? The answer to that question to this point is no. Is anybody going to claim him off of waivers? I don't know. I don't know the needs of the 31 other teams. I don't know the thought process on the 31 other teams of Sam Poulin, especially in the preseason when a lot of players are getting put on waivers. A lot of players are getting picked up. People are watching all around the league. So will he get claimed? Maybe. I think it's more likely that a Puljujarvi gets claimed. I think it's more likely that a Puustinen gets claimed if they get placed on waivers, and that is an if. If Poulin gets placed on waivers, which seems to be a likely scenario going forward, does somebody claim him? I don't know. But if they don't, I'm extremely happy to put him in the AHL because I think he deserves an opportunity. It doesn't seem like, as of right now, with the amount of players that they have, the amount of positions that they have to fill versus players that they have to potentially fill them, it seems like he's the odd man out. But he was really good in the American Hockey League when he was healthy last year. If he can be that again and earn another opportunity, I'd like to see him get more than a 3-game sample size because that's all he's received, right? He got 3 games a couple of years ago. He got 3 games last year. He was going to get another opportunity, but he got hit with the stomach bug that hit everybody at MSG last year. And by the time he was ready to go again, they were winning hockey games and they weren't changing anything, and he ended up getting sent back down. I'd like to see him get a more consistent opportunity. But as far as, am I okay with him in the AHL? 100%. He was really good at the American Hockey League. And I understand people are down on Sam Poulin because he was drafted 5 years ago now, and he's only played in 6 NHL games and doesn't look like somebody that's really going to aggressively push for an NHL spot over the next 2 weeks. I get it. You're down on him. He's still a very good player. He's still a decent prospect. he is still somebody who is great behind the net, great against the boards, and solid in the offensive zone. It's worked at the American Hockey League level. He hasn't really been given the opportunity to show that it's been able to transfer to the National Hockey League level. This is a guy that I don't think has ever really been great in training camp, but once the season begins, once you get into the flow of the year, Sam Poulin has picked his game up considerably, especially if you look at last season. From the start of the year when he had that ankle sprain, I believe it was an ankle sprain. It was a lower body injury that cost him the beginning of the season. When he came back, he was good as long as he was in the lineup. That's another question. That's another discussion. Can he stay healthy whenever the opportunity arises? That's one thing that we're going to have to follow along with all season. But I'm perfectly fine with him developing other players because he's a good player. He's just a player that has not been able to make that jump to the National Hockey League level. And as a first rounder, I understand why people would be down on him because of that. Let's go to Jackson McKnight, who says, is Yeager going to play for an NHL team he got traded to or play down? Yeager is not ready. And that is the whole reason that the Penguins made the trade for Rutger McGroarty, is he is going to be ready sooner, not more sooner, but sooner rather than later. Whereas Brayden Yeager is going to go back to the WHL again, play for the Moose Jaw Warriors again, probably have another fantastic season. But Brayden Yeager's not ready. If he was, the Penguins probably don't make the trade to get Rutger McGroarty. The whole impetus of that trade, I don't think that's the right word. The whole reason for that trade, let me stop trying to be smart. The whole reason for that trade was to get a prospect of Yeager's quality, which McGroarty is, and as of right now is a little further along, to get on the NHL roster sooner rather than later. Yeager, not going to be ready this year. I don't think anybody was ever expecting him to be ready this year. We gave him, I think, a 5% chance to push for a roster spot if he came to Penguins training camp. He's going to go back to the WHL, and then next year is when that conversation starts. Whereas this year, McGroarty is probably in 2 months already going to be on the NHL roster and not looking back. That's the whole reason for it. So no, don't expect to see Brayden Yeager playing for the Winnipeg Jets at all this year. Justin Long also wants an Erik Karlsson update. Unfortunately, the update is status quo. All we know is still day-to-day, upper body injury, skating before practice. At this point, it's been a week. Does it start to get concerning? Not yet. It's preseason. And as you've seen around the team, Crosby hasn't played in a preseason game. Malkin hasn't. Letang hasn't. So it's not like he's missing preseason action. Now, he is missing camp. He is missing some valuable reps, especially with what they did on Monday, which was the power play. But Erik Karlsson is a very, very good player, and he's also a veteran in this league. He can get up to speed faster than a lot of these younger guys can. So I'm not overly concerned yet. But as of right now, the update is still day-to-day, upper body injury, skating before practice. It's not fun, but that's what it's been for the last week. That's what it remains today. Let's close things out with Nick, who throws out here, can we just give a shout out to Taylor Haas of DK Pittsburgh Sports for being so consistent? She is one of the rock stars of the Pittsburgh media, one of the go-tos for me, certainly, for practice reports, for interviews, and for little snippets and videos from the locker room. Taylor Haas is one of the go-tos. If you're not following her, you should, because she is one of the best when it comes to covering the Pittsburgh Penguins day in and day out. So shout out to Taylor. Shout out to everybody on the Pittsburgh beat. Matt Venzel, I also referenced earlier in the show. So, we appreciate everybody that's boots on the ground there, because that gives us the updates that we need to sit here and get ready for Penguins hockey. We're 2 weeks away, guys. 2 weeks. That's it. 14 days. And the Penguins will take on the New York Rangers to open up the 2024-25 season. I'm getting excited. I know we got 5 preseason games left. I don't get overly excited about preseason games, but I am excited for 2 weeks from today. Penguins, Rangers, kicking off the season the best way they know how, against a rival on national television. But that's going to do it for this episode of Tip of the Ice-Burgh Live. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel on YouTube, or if you prefer, you can find us anywhere you get your podcast from. That's it for this one. We'll see you guys next time.